Okay, as we continue on in our study in the Gospel of John, we have been in chapter 13 now for 3 or 4 weeks. And the reason for that is because that this is the chapter of where you come down to the last night that Jesus spent on this earth. He ate the Passover supper with his disciples, and it was during this Passover supper that he instituted what we know today in the church as the Lord's Supper. And so we've been looking then at that rather in detail. But now then we come today, and as I've got up here, that there are other important things that took place on that particular night. That's what we're going to be looking at today. We're not going to be looking at the Lord's Supper. We've covered that. But what else took place during that evening? Now take your mind back. This is the last night that Jesus will spend on this earth before he is put to death. It is what is called the Jewish Passover supper, and that means that all the Jews had to kill the Passover lamb at about 6 o'clock at sundown, is when it is. They started eating that lamb, and it was called the Passover lamb. So they started eating this particular supper then at about 6 o'clock in the evening. During this supper, Jesus took the elements of the meal and he instituted the Lord's Supper. But what else happened? In other words, if he started, let's say, at 6 o'clock in eating this supper, probably got through, what's your guess? I don't have a guess. I know that what they did was, after this, they went out to the garden and certain things happened out there. But take it from 6 to 9, which is generally the guess that people take. So now, Jesus and his 12 apostles are upstairs in an upper room in somebody else's house, and they're eating this meal by themselves from 6 to 9. Now, during this time, he instituted the Lord's Supper. But how long would that take? Well, not very long, would it? What else did they do up there in that upper room? That's what we're going to be dealing with tonight, or this morning. A lot of other things took place up there in that upper room that John is going to tell us about. Now, during this Passover meal, Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. Matthew, Mark, Luke tell about that Lord's Supper. But here's the interesting thing. John tells us of other events that took place during this Passover supper. At the very beginning, Jesus got up and washed their feet, of which we've already studied about. And then he talked to them about humility and service. So, other things that he's going to be talking about that we'll look at today is he taught them about the betrayal. He said, now, I'm going to be betrayed here, and then here is what is going to happen. Another thing that he talked about was who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, the disciples were really excited at this time. They could sense a change coming. The attitude and the disposition of the Lord was a little different. It was very somber, very sober, very to the point of where he's wanting them to get certain messages. And so they're beginning to feel the kingdom is right around the corner. Now keep this in mind. The disciples knew that the kingdom was coming. Jesus had taught them from the very beginning. The very first sermons that he preached was, repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And he had taught them, it will come in your lifetime. And so they knew that the kingdom of heaven was coming. But they had a misconception. The only thing they knew about a kingdom is what they had been able to see in the world. And at that time, the only kingdoms that had ever existed were earthly kingdoms. They were kingdoms of where nature would set up a government and select a king, and then that government would be run by this king, and so the government was called a kingdom. Now, there were many, 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 many of them, and that's what they're looking for. So now what they're thinking is that Jesus now is going to become the king. He's going to set up a nation. The nation will be the Jewish nation, and Jesus will be its king. And after seeing all the miracles that Jesus has done, there's no limit to what he can do. And he has promised, and the prophets have promised, that at this time, nobody can conquer him. He will have a kingdom of peace, and so forth and so on. So they're looking for really something big to happen. We're about to go into this kingdom, and it's going to be the most marvelous, magnificent kingdom on earth. It will be here, headquarters will be in Jerusalem. Jesus will be the king. Nobody can conquer him. We will conquer all other nations. And so, when you mention kingdom, that's what I want you to think about in their mind. That's what they thought. So they were tremendously excited. We haven't ever had anything like that here in America, of where we would all be excited. We might get excited about having a new president or something, but nothing like that kingdom there, because that's going to change the whole world, and Jesus and his apostles will be ruling the world as far as they were concerned. So, this is on their mind. And so, they're going to be talking about this. So, Jesus, on this night, will give them some instructions about who would be the greatest. Then he's going to give them a new commandment on love. Brand new commandment. Hadn't been given before. Then he's going to foretell about Peter's denial. He's already dealt with Judas. Remember, we've already studied that Judas is going to betray him, and we've studied about how he went out, but he now is going to tell about Peter and how Peter will deny him. So these are the things here that we'll be looking at today as we finish up chapter 13. Now, keep this in mind. We've pointed this out over and over again. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're called the Synoptic Gospels because they deal with the same subject. Now, they deal with the same subject, and they've been dealing with the Lord's Supper. John doesn't deal with the Lord's Supper, since they've already done that. But he teaches them about humility and betrayal as he's dealing with this Lord's Supper. This is the same way that he's covered other subjects. Whatever Matthew, Mark, and Luke covers, he doesn't cover again. He gives us new details. So tonight, or this morning, we're going to be studying about some of these new things now that Jesus is going to be teaching. Now, this is unbelievable. Actually, I think in our eyes. But while they're sitting there at that table, this atmosphere, this attitude of this supper, and of where Jesus has said, I have desired with strong desire. That word is lust in the Greek. I have lusted to eat this Passover with you, and I'll never eat it again until it's fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. Wow. From their viewpoint, what's he saying? Jesus is saying, this is the Passover I have been lusting to eat with you. And this will be the last one I will ever eat with you until the kingdom of God comes. So they are expecting big things. The kingdom of God. So now then, in this atmosphere of solemn situation that Jesus has taught them, they go back to that age-old question that they've had, and they begin to argue about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Now, if you think about it, in our nation, that's all we know about. But you take our nation, and what do all the politicians want? Do any of them ever want to be the greatest? Any politician ever want to be president? here it is, we're coming into this stage again now, about 3 years before the election, and they're already starting. I'm the best qualified person to become president. And so they're starting on it. People are starting to set themselves up to become vice president if somebody, certain person, is elected. All the politicians are looking, how can I position myself? That's the name of the game. That's what they were doing. They were doing nothing more than what the politicians in Washington does today. Now here is the interesting thing to me. Jesus at this time has washed their feet, and he's given them this teaching, but instead of provoking a discussion on service and humility, they get to arguing about who will be greatest in the kingdom. Which one of us is going to be the greatest in the kingdom? So Luke gives an account, and he says, now there was also a dispute among them, to which of them should be considered the greatest. He said unto them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, but those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as one who serves. He just got through serving them by washing their feet. But you are those that have continued with me in my trials, and I bestow upon you a kingdom. So now then he's telling them, you're going to receive a kingdom. Just as my Father bestowed upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table of my kingdom and sit on the thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So in some sense, you're going to have great authority. We've talked about that. I don't want to repeat it today. In some sense, you're going to have great authority. But I want you to know the kingdom's coming. I'm appointing you a kingdom. But here had to be some disappointing news. The greatest in the kingdom will be the one who serves the most. In my kingdom, it will not be like other kingdoms. And it'll not be in that way. Now, the disciples have had this greatness problem all along. This had been a problem ever since he chose them. As you go back to the very beginning, at that time, now this is way before this Passover supper, the disciples came to Jesus saying, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Ever since he had called them and told them the king was coming, who's going to be the greatest? Then Jesus called him a little child to him and set him in the midst of them and said, surely I say unto you, unless you are converted, that is, turn about, change your heart, and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Now he says, let me tell you 12 guys something. Unless you're converted and become as a little child, you're not even going to get in the kingdom, let alone be the greatest in the kingdom. But to get in the kingdom, you have to turn and become like a little child. Therefore, whoso humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So you say, in what sense must we become like little children? In humility, humbling yourself. Now, in a little while, class will be dismissed. Kids will come in here. They're going to sit down. Now then, what do we expect out of them? Which kids are the, how shall I say it, the best behaved, that act the way they should? Is it the one that comes in here, Mom, Dad, scoot over, I want to sit down here? Or is it the one that comes in, Mom and Dad says, come here, and they come. You sit over there and you be quiet. Don't talk to your sister. They go over and they sit down. Which kid is the best kid? Which one? Well, unless we have that attitude, unless we have a humble attitude that we are not in control, but we're here to serve, we can't even get in the kingdom let alone be the greatest in the kingdom. Luke tells the same story, and he said, "For he who is least among you shall be called great." Now, wouldn't that be disappointing if you were one of those 12 apostles and thinking about how you were going to become great? You're one of his chosen. Jesus is going to be king. He's going to rule, and you are one of his chosen. Now then, he comes and he says, now, instead of you being great like you think, the one who is the least among you will be the greatest. Whew. I can't imagine how disappointing that would be when they heard that. Right? Now, that was back before they ever get down to this point that's in here. Now, it caused a jealousy problem among the disciples. One time, James and John came. We're told by other Gospels that their mother brought them. The mom brought them and said, "Teacher, we want you to do whatsoever we shall ask." And he said unto them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us that we may set one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory." So now here's James and John. Come to Jesus. Grant us a favor. Okay, what is it? Okay, would you give one of us the position of your right hand? That's the next in authority in the kingdom. And the other on your left, which would be the second of next greatest of authority in the kingdom. Would you let us be right behind you? Would you let us have all of this authority in the kingdom? That's what James and John ask. And you say, wow, what audacity. Yeah, that would take audacity to do that. But Jesus now is going to teach them. And he said, now there are certain things you're going to do, but to sit on my right hand or on my left hand is not mine to give. It is for those to whom it is prepared. So no, I'm not going to grant you this thing that you've asked. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. So this subject caused friction, which it causes friction today in the political realm. I'm just trying to point out that really there's nothing new under the sun. These guys are acting the same that we'd act if it happened here today. So now then, he said, no, that's not it. So their argument about then who's going to be the greatest comes to an end. But the thing I said that boggles my mind, you would think that if you were sitting, maybe you wouldn't think that, not if you're a politician. But if you were sitting at the feet of Jesus, you had seen him humbly serve, you had heard his words of telling you these things, you'd think that wouldn't be the time that you would get to arguing about who was going to be the greatest. But it was. That's what was on their mind. So Jesus took care of that. He didn't tell them who's going to be the greatest, except the least will be the greatest. Then Jesus goes ahead and changes the subject. And so it said, so when he had gone out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him immediately. Now, I've broken these statements down so that we can kind of analyze them one at a time. Now then, all of a sudden, he said, now the Son of Man is glorified. This is kind of unusual way of talking. The Bible talks about it a lot when God or Jesus is a speaker. Now is something happening. In other words, they speak about what's going to happen as though it has already happened. God even did that with Abraham having a child. Spoke as though it already happened. Because when God speaks, it is so certain to happen that he calls things that hadn't happened as though they are, the Hebrew writer tells us. Now, the Son of Man is glorified. He's going to die tonight. He's going to be raised from the dead 3 days from now. And when this happens, he's going to be glorified. Glorified means exalted, held in high opinion. People are going to stand in amazement of him. So now, Jesus is saying, now it is here. The time has come when the Son of Man, that's Jesus, is glorified. So Jesus is glorified. Tonight is the night. Now he said, and God is glorified in him. So God is glorified in Jesus. Now when Jesus dies and raised from the dead, Jesus will be glorified. People will hold him in high opinion, but they'll also hold God in high opinion. God prophesied, God told us, and God raised him from the dead. And if God is glorified in him, that is, if God is glorified in Jesus by his death and resurrection, God will also glorify him in himself. So, if God is glorified by Jesus, then God will also glorify Jesus by Jesus. That Jesus will also be glorified by himself, by what he accomplishes. It's really saying the same things it says up there in the first one, the Son of Man is glorified. What Jesus is trying to tell them is, I want you to understand something. I want you to understand that tonight is the night I will be betrayed. We've already talked about that. Tonight is the night I'll be taken to court, and in the morning I'll be put to death. I'm going to die. They're going to betray me. They're going to kill me. And I want you to know what is really happening is not that I will be trodden underfoot, but what is really happening is I am being glorified. Because when they kill me, I'll rise again. So from Jesus' viewpoint and God's viewpoint, Jesus' death is different than man's viewpoint. So he said, then, and glorify him immediately. That is, Jesus will be glorified immediately. Now here he's going to be put to death, so we can look at him and say, that's a terrible thing, he's being defeated. No, this is how he's going to be glorified and held above all other people who've ever lived. Because Jesus is going to die publicly in front of everybody by the hands of the Jews and the Roman government. He'll be put in a grave and guarded, but he'll walk out of that grave and show himself to be alive. So he said, that's what I want you to know. Tonight's the Last Supper. Now it's time that the Son of Man is glorified. Now then, down at the end of the supper, he gives them a new commandment. Now the old commandment that had been given by God was in the Old Testament. It's quoted in Matthew 22:39. When the Jews came to Jesus and asked him, which is the greatest commandment? Now they're asking, what does God say? He quoted the Old Testament. He said, well, the greatest commandment is thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Then he said, now the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That was the commandment on love. That's the commandment that Moses had given. That's a commandment that God had commanded them. But now, today, we're going to have a new commandment. We're going to have one that we raise the standard just a little bit higher. So Jesus said, little children, talking to these 12, I shall be with you a little while longer. You will seek me. And as I said to the Jews, where I am going, you cannot come. So now I say unto you, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And by this will all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for the other. So I said, now here's the new commandment that I'm leaving with you. I'm going. I'm going away. This is the last night. I'm going away. And where I go, I can't tell you right now. Subject's too big. But I'm going away, and I'm going to leave you here. Here's what I want you to do. Now remember, he had just told them about who's the greatest. He said, I'm going to give you a new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Now that's greater than as you love yourself. Jesus loved us more than any love we could ever bestow. He loved us so much, he gave his precious, sinless life so we might live. Now, we might take a little peek into our own souls. Do we love our fellow man that much? Pick out any Christian here. Do you love them that much? That you would give your life in order to save their life? Jesus said, that's where I want you to elevate your love. I now want you to bring it up to that standard so that you love each other just like I have loved you. And when you do that, he said, that will be your badge. By this will all men know you're my disciples. This is how people are going to see that you are my disciples, that you have learned from me. You haven't learned from Muhammad. You haven't learned from Confucius. You haven't learned from Moses. You haven't learned from Abraham Lincoln. You haven't learned from, you name it. But when people see you elevating your standard of love up to where you would give your life for the life of a fellow Christian, then they're going to say, that person is different. What's different? That person is a disciple of Christ. He said, now that's the command I'll leave you with. And that's the standard they now are to raise up to in order to be obedient to Jesus. Now then we get down, and Jesus now is going to turn to Peter. Now remember, he just said, little children, I shall be with you a little while longer, and you shall seek me, as I said to the Jews. But where I'm going, you cannot come. So now I say to you. So he said, now, I'm leaving. Giving you this, I'm leaving. Now Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you shall follow me afterwards. That is, you can't follow with me right now. Where I'm going, you can't do it because you have to die. Now, later you will follow after me. Where I'm going now, later when you die, you will follow after me. Now then Peter said to him, Lord, why cannot I follow you now? He's still looking here that Jesus is planning on going to Germany or Spain or China or where's Jesus going? We want to go with him. Why can't I go? Then he said, I will lay down my life for your sake. So Peter's saying, there's nothing that I wouldn't give to go with you. Nothing that can hold me back. So I want to go with you. Jesus answered him, will you lay down your life for my sake? Most assuredly I say to you, the rooster shall not crow until you have denied me 3 times. Boy, what a big statement. Now he's looking at the most aggressive of all the disciples, the apostles. And here it is that he has taught them about service and humility. He has told them he's leaving, but they can't go. He's told them these things, but Peter's humility hasn't sunk in yet. See? Hadn't quite sunk in. And so he said, I'll even die for you. Then when Jesus tells him this, I can't imagine how he felt. Peter, this very night, I'm not talking about 3 months from now, this very night, before the rooster crows in the morning, you will deny me 3 times. Not just once, not twice, but you'll do it 3 times. How must Peter have felt? Luke says, the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, now, this tells something. Jesus is saying, Satan is going to go after you, Peter. I've prayed in your behalf. And when you return to me, what does that mean? Peter, when you failed me, when you've left, but after you've returned, then this will happen. Strengthen your brethren. Here it is, Peter, you of all people, so absolutely weak that you will deny me 3 times. This braggadocious man that's made these boasts and denying me 3 times, complete failure. When you return, I want you to strengthen your brethren. I want you to be the stronghold and strengthen them. And he said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and death. In other words, Peter is not taking this seriously. I will do anything. I'll go to prison. I'll go to death. And he said unto them, the rooster shall not crow this day before you shall deny me 3 times that you know me. Boy, hard to understand. Now, Matthew and Mark's account, here we see some more braggadocious material. He said, even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble. So Peter's making this, Lord, even if these other 11 guys, if they stumble, I'll never stumble. Not much humility. That's what Jesus has been talking about. And he said, even if I have to die for you, I'll not deny you. And he goes on there and then in Mark and says, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. Now I put that in there, the cock crows twice, to bring up this question. Why the cock crows twice? Because when the cock crowed in the morning, he looked over and Jesus had done that. In that land, they had roosters that crowed at midnight, and then roosters that crowed again at about daybreak, as they do here in America. And so what he's actually saying is, Peter, you won't deny me before midnight, but you will deny me before daybreak in the morning when the rooster crows. Now, supper's now over. Matthew says, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Well, there's the Mount of Olives. The walk would be about 1/2 mile to somewhere on this side of the mount. So now they're going to get up, they're going to walk out to that mount, and then the betrayal and so forth will take place. But next week, we'll pick up our story at this point. Class dismissed.